Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Who Has to Know or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by TrueFreak89, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Britt. Who Has to Know? Chapter 9. Hey, sweetie, how was school? Willa greeted her daughter as she walked into the kitchen. Fine, Mama, Raelle said, dropping her bag on the floor by the fridge. She reached for one of the cupcakes sitting on the island in the center of the kitchen. Willa made them on her day off the day before, and Raelle had already scoffed the majority of them. Ray, you'll spoil your dinner. I won't, Raelle objected, right after taking a bite out of the cupcake. And don't talk with your mouth full either. Willa rolled her eyes as she gave a shake of her head. Raelle swallowed and gave the older woman a sheepish apology. Sorry, Mama. No Scylla tonight? Willa asked, changing the subject as Raelle carried on eating. She swallowed hard, the cake catching at the back of her throat. I'm not sure. Isadora didn't give us any homework today, said Raelle. She could hardly be surprised her mom was asking after the other girl, considering how often Scylla had been over in the weeks since they'd first started their unusual arrangement. Oh, isn't she coming over, anyway? Willa asked, a knowing smile on her lips. Mama, it's not like that. Raelle shook her head. She knew her mother was grasping at straws. She hadn't caught Raelle and Scylla doing anything. Raelle would have known if she had, but that didn't stop her from speculating. We're friends, is all. Your pops and I were friends once, too. Mom, Raelle pulled a face. I do not need to hear that stuff. She shoved what was left of her cupcake into her mouth, picked up her bag, and headed upstairs. Raelle flopped onto her bed and pulled out her phone to message Scylla. They hadn't talked about hooking up after school that day, but Raelle figured it was worth a shot. Scylla was yet to say no to her. That changed when her reply finally came. Can't tonight, busy. Raelle frowned at the screen, her eyes scanning over the short message again in case she'd read it wrong. She bit the inside of her cheek. Later, then? Scylla glanced at Raelle's latest message while Porter hung up their coats. She'd been careful about not letting him see her phone since he'd almost read one of Raelle's messages the week before in the cafeteria. It had been a close call, and Scylla had learned her lesson. She pocketed her phone as Porter turned back around to face her. You sure you're up for this? He asked, nothing but concern in his eyes. We can do it another night. I'll tell them you're not feeling well. Porter, Scylla placed a hand on his chest. It's dinner with your parents. I'll manage. Thanks, Syl. Porter stepped closer, wrapping his arms around the much shorter girl and hugging her tight. It means a lot. It really does. Oh, hi, kids. Mrs. Tippett greeted him as she stepped out into the hall. She was a tall, lean woman with the same tight blonde curls as Porter. She had a kind face and put on a good show. But Scylla knew better. If Beth Tippett had the slightest inclination that her son was gay, she would toss him into some godforsaken conversion camp before Scylla could blink. Look at you two. Beth's grin widened. You just can't keep your hands off each other, can you? Scylla faked a smile. Family dinners with Porter's parents had been monthly occurrence for as long as they'd been pretending to date. It was a way of ensuring Porter's parents brought their story and didn't get too suspicious about how close he and Byron were. The two teens escaped upstairs to Porter's room until dinner was ready. His bedroom was that of a typical teenage boy, messy and cluttered with clothes strewn across the floor and lacrosse trophies adorning a shelf over his desk. It reminded Scylla of Rael's room, which always looked like Rael had attempted to hastily tidy up by pushing everything into a corner or under the bed right before Scylla arrived. Scylla wore an idle smile as she ran her hand over the paper deliberately left out on Porter's desk for her, a response to his scholarship application for Cornell University. Everyone expected Porter to coast into college on the back of his parents' dime, but Porter had other ideas. "You got it?" Scylla spun around to face him, her face alight with pure joy for him. She couldn't believe he'd kept it from her. She said as much as she socked him in the arm. Porter chuckled, making a half-hearted attempt to defend himself. "I wanted to surprise you. I haven't told Byron yet, so don't tell him, okay?" "I won't," said Scylla, beaming with a smile that went from ear to ear. The biggest obstacle to their plans for next year had vanished. Porter and the twins intended to move to New York together for college next fall. A fresh start for all of them and, most importantly, a chance for Byron and Porter to live their lives as they wanted to. Porter was going to tell his parents the truth after graduation. It wouldn't matter if they disowned him after that. He'd be 18 with a full ride to college under his belt and able to stand on his own 2 feet. Porter grinned as he lay back on his bed with a contented sigh, propping his hands behind his head as he stared up at the ceiling. "It's all coming together, Syl. This time next year we'll be in our apartment in the city. No more pretending." Scylla climbed onto the bed and lay down beside him, sharing his goofy smile. "I can't wait. But we need a place with thick walls, though. I'm really sick of hearing my brother and my best friend making sex noises." She elbowed him playfully in the side and Porter chuckled. He rolled onto his side to face her, his hands tucked under his head. "We can get a little loud," he said, then bit his lip as if considering something. Scylla tensed as, for one insane moment, she entertained the idea that Porter and Byron wouldn't want her living with them. Their cozy New York brownstone apartment had been their dream for years, and they were so painfully close now. Scylla couldn't help but expect something to go wrong. "You know, you could always get us back." "Have someone over?" he said, and Scylla let out the breath she'd been holding. Byron and Porter would never abandon her. She was crazy for ever thinking otherwise. "Got to lose that fee card sometime," Porter chuckled, knocking his shoulder into Scylla's as she snorted. He and Byron had no idea. Scylla felt her cheeks flush. She bit the inside of her cheek with a shake of her head. "It's senior year. I don't have time for distractions. Besides, the only decent guy in town is already taken by my brother," she teased. Despite their act, the only love between the two of them was purely platonic. Porter was like a second brother to her and could be just as annoying as Byron sometimes. "What about girls?" he asked with a wiggle of his eyebrows, and Scylla knew what was coming before he even said it. "Rael is cute." "Porter!" Scylla's head fell to his shoulder as she buried her face in it with a moan. She was terrible at lying to her brothers. "It's not even like that." Porter played with her hair, running it through his fingers. "You two seem close lately. And I'm not judging. I want to see you happy. You do so much for me and Vi, Syl, and your life is practically on hold because of it." "I don't mind," Scylla sat up, leaning over. She pressed a kiss to Porter's forehead. "I'd do anything for my brothers, and there really isn't anything going on between me and Collar." Porter looked like he wanted to say more about it, but he didn't get the chance as his mom called up to let them know dinner was ready. The two teens made their way back downstairs and into the dining room. Mr. Tippett was already sitting in his usual seat at the head of the table. He greeted them both fondly as they took their seats, before falling into his usual routine of questioning his son. "How was school? Are you keeping your grades up?" "Yes, sir," answered Porter. He sat up straight in his chair and did his best to hold his father's eye contact. He'd only get in trouble if he gave in to the urge to look down at his plate. Good, Mr. Tippett nodded. "You keep them up if you want to get into college. Your mom and I aren't paying for you to sit on your ass for 4 years." "Yes, sir," Porter repeated. His jaw clenched tight. It relaxed a little as Scylla squeezed his leg under the table. He had his scholarship. They were on the home stretch, and come summer, he wouldn't have to put up with this kind of stuff anymore. "How was work, dear?" Mrs. Tippett asked, taking her husband's attention away from Porter. Porter gave a quiet sigh, his shoulders slackening. His relief didn't last long. "A complete train wreck. This new guy we've got who doesn't know his ass from his elbow. Not that I expected much from one of his kind. He's a friend of Dorothy, if you get my meaning." He leaned over to wink at Porter, like he expected his son to share his disgust. Porter dropped his gaze and busied himself with the food on his plate. Scylla's heart ached for him. She wanted to say something, but she knew it would only get Porter in trouble. They still had close to 7 months until they graduated, and Porter, younger than the twins, wouldn't be 18 until late May. No matter what Porter said, there was no way Scylla could risk something more with Rael. Not while she was playing the dutiful girlfriend to Porter's parents and the rest of town. She squeezed his knee again under the table. Dinner lasted an age, with Porter's parents grilling them on how school was going and their plans for the next year. Scylla felt a flood of relief the moment she stepped into her own house with Porter in tow. Byron was waiting for them in the living room, camped out on the sofa with popcorn and snacks ready for their movie night. "Hey, how's dinner?" Porter walked over to the sofa and curled up beside Byron, wrapping his arms around him in a crushing hug while his head came to rest on Byron's shoulder. "That bad, huh?" Byron asked, the question directed at Scylla as he ran his fingers through Porter's curls. "I'm not feeling movie night tonight. You guys have some time to yourselves," Scylla said, squeezing her brother's shoulder. The couple spent so much time pretending not to be together that Scylla liked to give them their space when she could. Byron nodded at her. He didn't need to say it out loud for Scylla to know that he was grateful. Scylla retreated to her room and pulled out her phone as she lay on her bed. She hadn't forgotten about Rael's text earlier. She just hadn't had time to reply. "Sorry, was having dinner with Porter's parents." Rael's response didn't come quick. It was almost an hour before she replied to Scylla's message. If there was any doubt she was being petulant about Scylla ignoring her first, then it vanished as Scylla read her reply. "Porter taking care of you for a change?" There were no emoticons, nor any attempt to show she was joking. Scylla glared at the screen before tossing her phone aside. It landed on her bed with a soft thump and stayed there for the rest of the night. Scylla grabbed at her pillow and placed it over her face, releasing a silent scream into it. She had far more to worry about than hurting Rael Collar's massive ego. It wasn't like the other girl couldn't afford to be taken down a peg or two. Rael paused on the way to her locker the next morning when she spotted Scylla already standing at hers. She sucked in her cheeks and forced her feet to keep moving. Scylla hadn't replied to her last message the night before. Rael knew she'd crossed the line with her comment about Porter satisfying her for once, but it wasn't like she could take it back. She yanked open her locker with a nod of her head at Syl. "Hey." "Hi," Scylla replied without looking at her, and Rael's insides churned. She bit at her lip, trying to decide how to play things with the other girl. It was a Wednesday, and they both had study hall third period. "Want to hook up third?" Rael asked, going with acting like nothing had happened. "No," Scylla answered curtly, and a rush of anger ran through Rael. It was a little too late for Scylla to act like she was above Rael, especially when she had spent so much time beneath her lately. "Fine," Rael slammed her locker shut. "If you don't want to do this anymore, then just forget about it." "Ray!" Scylla called after her as the blonde stormed off. She brought her head to rest against her own locker with a heavy sigh and held her stomach. She let Rael go. Scylla wasn't about to explain herself to her when she was acting like such a child. They had biology together first period. Scylla dragged herself there after homeroom and took her seat at the table she and Rael shared. The other girl walked in just before the second bell. She sat down without so much as a glance in Scylla's direction. Scylla ignored her right back. She sat slumped at her desk, resting her chin in one hand as she struggled to focus on what Isadora was saying, up at the front of the class. Eventually, Isadora set them off, working on questions in their pairs. Raelle made a point of pulling out her textbook and making a start without a word to Scylla. Scylla ground her teeth together. She wasn't in the mood for one of Raelle's tantrums. Their arrangement was casual. So what if Scylla didn't want to hook up that day? She winced and clutched her stomach as a fresh round of cramps ripped at her insides. Out of the corner of her eye, Raelle noticed the other girl's distress. Her expression softened as she turned to Scylla and asked, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "Like you care," Scylla growled out, and Raelle felt a pang of guilt. Raelle thought she was holding out to get her back for what she said the night before. She hadn't stopped to consider the fact that Scylla might be unwell. Raelle's guilt ate away at her for the rest of the lesson. Scylla raced off as soon as the bell went, not giving Raelle a chance to pull her aside. She made an excuse to Tally and Abigail about needing something from her locker and chased after Scylla. She spotted her going into the bathroom and followed her inside. Raelle was leaning against the sink waiting for the other girl when she walked out of the bathroom stall. A flash of surprise crossed over her face, but Scylla quickly smoothed it out into disinterest. She held her chin up as she walked over to the sink next to the one Raelle was standing at. She washed her hands, continuing to ignore Raelle's presence. "I'm sorry," Raelle said as Scylla yanked a paper towel from the holder on the wall to dry her hands off. Scylla pursed her lips, her gaze fixed straight ahead on a crackled tile on the wall. Raelle ducked her head and toyed with the hem of her shirt. "I'm sorry, and I do care." Scylla closed her eyes for a moment, trying to keep it together as a well of emotion bubbled up inside. "Raelle, how long have we been doing this?" she asked, opening her eyes again as she turned to face the other girl. The question caught Raelle off guard, and she had to think about it, and Scylla bit back a smirk as Raelle began counting on her fingers. About a month?" she answered, like Scylla had asked her some kind of trick question. Scylla nodded and narrowed her eyes at the blonde. "And what happens once a month?" Raelle scrunched her face up. A full moon?" "Close, but not quite." Scylla gave a snort of laughter. Raelle looked like she was racking her brain for the answer, so Scylla put her out of her misery. "I'm on my period, Ray. I have cramps. I feel like shit, and sex is the last thing on my mind right now." "Oh!" Raelle's eyes grew comically wide as a realization hit her. "Shit, I'm sorry, Syl. You should have told me." Raelle's shoulders sagged. She'd acted like an asshole over nothing. Scylla could see the guilt on her face, but she wasn't ready to let Raelle off quite so easily. "Why? Would you have marked it on your calendar? Put it in your diary so we can sync our cycles up?" she teased, drawing a blush on Raelle's usually pale cheeks. "I don't get my period," scoffed Raelle. "I take birth control. I'm kind of surprised you don't." "Why would I?" Scylla asked, remembering she was supposed to be dating Porter a moment too late. She lied through the skin of her teeth to make up for it. "Porter and I use protection, and we haven't had sex in a while anyway," she huffed, crossing her arms over her chest defensively. "Since we started?" Raelle asked, sounding almost hopeful. "Yeah," said Scylla, tucking her hair behind her ear with a sheepish smile. "Wait, why are you on birth control?" she asked, turning the tables on Raelle. The other girls gave a shrug. "It stops me getting my period when I'm diving." "Oh, that made sense." Still, Scylla twisted her face. "That's so unfair. And Akasha would lock me away in a tower if I asked to go on birth control," she huffed. A hint of a frown played on Raelle's lips. "Are you seriously telling me Anacostia doesn't know you and Porter are having sex?" Scylla flushed. Anacostia, unlike Raelle, knew exactly who Porter was having sex with in their house. "There's a big difference between knowing and suspecting," Scylla answered, brushing off Raelle's question as she turned to fix her hair in the mirror in front of her. The corners of her mouth curled up as she caught Raelle checking out her ass. "Huh. And what do you think Anacostia would do to me if she suspected what we were doing?" Raelle asked as she slid up behind Scylla, her hands seeking the other girl's hips as she pressed a kiss to the side of her neck. Scylla's hands came up to cover Raelle's. Had she not been on her period, she would have guided one into the waistband of her pants. As it was, she had to settle for Rael teasing featherlight kisses. Scylla broke out in a smirk as she turned to face the other girl, holding Rael's cheeks in her hands as she said with a chuckle, "Knowing Kostya, she'd probably shoot you." Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.